Hello everyone, my name is Dana and welcome to the Orchid Hut. Today we are going to talk about a featured orchid. It's a Latoria type Dendrobium by the name of Little Green Apples. And this is actually the very first Dendrobium that I ever had in my collection. I've probably had it about 5 or 6 years now. So I feel like I know it pretty well, and I would like to share it with you because during the fall season is when it really puts on a spectacular bloom show. As you can see right here, it has clusters of 4 or 5 blooms, and they are a mixture of solid green for the most part petals and a lip that looks black, but when the sun hits these petals from behind, they're truly more of a burgundy or even sort of a maroon color. They're really quite striking in the sun. So I'm going to change up the camera angle just a little bit so that you can get a closer view of this orchid, and I'll be right back with how I have been caring for it. Okay, so now we are looking more at the top of the plant, and this is a rather tall dendrobium. And the bloom clusters, this was the one that I showed you earlier, but there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of these clusters all ready to open at one time. They are slightly fragrant, not so much so that you can smell it from a distance, but if you do get close to it, there is a little bit of a very faint, sweet scent. Like I said, it's a really tall plant with canes that are easily 12 to 24 inches tall. This Dendrobium this year put on a really good root system, and I have featured it in earlier videos about root growth and growth progression. So I will link those videos down below in the description. And every single year this orchid does really well. It's not difficult to care for. I grow it in the house year-round, intermediate temperatures, water it when it gets dry, which in the hot summer months is about every week to 10 days. It does bloom in the spring as well as put on new growth in the late winter to spring. It will have an odd bloom cluster or two during the summer, but then in the fall is when it really decides to give you the best of its blooms. Now, I'm very fortunate that this orchid was not severely set back on me this year. For anyone who's familiar with what happened in Texas this past February, I'm really lucky that I didn't lose all of my indoor orchids. We had 3 days in February where the outside temperatures were 6 to 9 degrees Fahrenheit, and it didn't warm up above that. And simultaneously, we had 3 days with no electricity. No electricity, not even for a few hours here and there. So power was out, and it was way below freezing outside. We had a lot of difficulties to deal with during that time, and honestly, my orchids in the kitchen window were not my primary concern. By day 2 of that weather with no electricity, the inside of the house was 42 degrees Fahrenheit. And even though we had a gas log fireplace going in the living room, it just couldn't even keep up. You know, you could sit within 10 or 15 feet of the gas log fireplace and you could feel a bit warmer, but the rest of the house was still frigid. And all of my orchids were still in the bay window, so I'm sure they caught the full brunt of about 48 hours of 42 degrees Fahrenheit. And the interesting thing about this orchid is that all of the older growth, the older canes, and the older leaves actually did just fine and were really not affected by that prolonged temperature. However, the newer canes that had just started to grow over the winter and into the spring completely lost their leaves because they were still too delicate and thin and had not hardened off. So, for example, this cane right here just lost all of its leaves. They just turned brown, withered, and died, and I eventually cut them off. And so the cane for this year's growth is still here, although it's missing its leaves. And I believe there are maybe 2 others buried inside the plant here where that same thing happened. Yes, here's another one. So you can see that this cane has no leaves at the top. So this orchid, you know, had to kind of bounce back from a lot over the winter, and still, you know, did well. Put on great root growth. It's still supported by all of the old canes and the leaves. It's a very easy orchid to grow, great for beginners. It doesn't seem to be picky. It's drought tolerant if you kind of forget about it, but you know, if you overwater it, it's not the end of the world either. It gets, you know, the eastern exposure in my bay window year round, and I'm hoping this year that we don't have any prolonged cold spells without heat in the house. So, you know, next year maybe it will do even better, and it will have some more canes that can maintain their leaves. So, featured orchid, Dendrobium little green apples. If you find one, I highly recommend it. The only thing you might want to consider is whether or not you have space for the full-sized plant. Thanks for watching. Please hit the like button if you enjoyed this video or learned something new, and the subscribe button will be in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. Please look for me on Instagram, The Orchid Hut. If you would like to join on Instagram, that would be great. Talk to you next time.